Hey everyone, it's Robert Hall, and in today's video, we're going to talk about 10 things that I look for to drive story in a photo. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you already know that I am an editorial photographer. In the photography community, people may refer to editorial photography as a visual style. That is, a photo has an editorial look to it, but this is kind of absurd given the range of visual styles that editorial photography can encapsulate. Is that an appropriate use of encapsulate? The reality is the niche of editorial photography is defined as photography that accompanies a story, most often with a text-based story, but editorial photography can be completely visual in nature and there can be no words attached. It's a weird niche, but the big thing to know here is that editorial photography is meant to enhance the words in a story with proper visuals. So let's get into the 10 things that I look for to do just that. Number one, and the most important thing to me, because as you'll see, it sets the stage for so many other things that I look for, is an authentic environment. This is extremely important, even if it doesn't feel the most photogenic. Now, in this first photo, I think it's clear as day that this is about someone involved in the teaching of young children. And that's just evident from the location. You don't even need to read a word about her. You understand that she is in a position involved with young children. I also think that there's aspects of it that make it obvious that it's a teaching environment. First, the fire alarm on the wall kind of makes it clear that it's a classroom and not like some type of home environment. The paintings on the wall, you can see in one instance a name in the corner, these rules on the wall, all of those things add context for the viewer. Here's another instance with a marketing professional in a much cleaner environment, but you can clearly see that he is involved in the making of those advertisements or designs that are on the wall behind him. Now, this was a completely manufactured environment because his entire process and working environment pretty much works on that computer, which was also included, but we wanted to bring out a visual representation of the work that he does, which is primarily digital, which is why everything is put on the wall. In this instance, the rows and the columns of all the designs on the back make it seem digital and has a graphical element to the story. Now, I did say when you're choosing an authentic location, sometimes this may not be the most photogenic option, but even if it's not necessarily photogenic or, clutter-free or simple color schemes, anything like that, it still takes the viewer one step closer to the story. And being in these environments gives you more opportunity for the second thing that I look for, which is layering, including details of the story in both the foreground and the background of the image. These photos are about a costume designer at Oakland University, and as you can see, foreground element is clothing, then we've got the subject, background element is more clothing. Then we've got another example of it here. We've got materials in the foreground, even on the same plane as the subject, we've got the mannequins and the costumes, and in the background, we've got more pieces that are critical, even a readable note up here in the top right, we've got the words fabric inventory. A few more examples of layering here. We've got books in the foreground, books in the background. She's actively working on something. It's very clear that she's often going through all of this text. Now, yes, there's a person as the subject of this photo, but the whole story is about a program designed to get business students access to business clothing. So rather than just have a bunch of negative space here on the left, I filled the foreground with another suit. Now, the third and fourth thing that I look for kind of go hand in hand, and both are again affected by being in a genuine environment. Number three is action. While it's appropriate to just focus on the subject in a photo, like I love these, it still has the natural environment, but I also want to find the actions of what the person is doing. This is the what of the story if you're looking at who, what, where, when, and why. And when you have people in the places that they normally are, doing the actions that they normally go through, you get to my fourth thing that I look for, which is comfort. Comfort is extremely important in a photo because it puts the subject at ease. It makes them more visually appealing in the photo because they're more likely to be smiling or at peace or whatever it is that you're looking for to hit home in the story. It's just easier to do when they're familiar with everything around them, both in what they're doing and the place that they are. And I think my favorite instance of this is when you see comfort in an area that may otherwise look chaotic to you. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this chaotic because it looks so tidy. These environments here are going to look chaotic to anyone who has not been involved with making costumes. Right here with the subject surrounded by books, literally in all angles in the photo, but she looks completely at peace. This is actually a rather peaceful location here, but it looks chaotic just because of all the water droplets flying everywhere. Here's a rather literal display of comfort. Okay, the fifth thing that I look for is color simplicity, and you can see this in a lot of the photos that we've gone over. In some of them, we have very simple environments, just a big blue wall. Otherwise, you've got some warm tones from skin in this light above, but beyond that, it's just neutrals in the image. In pretty much every image that we've gone over so far, you can see that most of this is done by cropping. I wish I had a pullback of this location because this is about all the space that this location afforded. You can actually see right here on the edge of the frame, this is where the wall changes color. So by excluding all of that, simply by cropping and only showing this color, it has much more simplicity to it. And all of this allows the viewer to more easily focus on what's important in the photo. Even going back to this photo, the color scheme is actually rather simple because we've just got some warm tones, some taupe tones. I mean, they're in the curtains over here. They're this table, this mannequin. And beyond that, the aqua tone is dominant. It's a rather bold choice for some wall color back here, but we've also got it in the mannequin that he's working on, the most dominant mannequin in the scene. And the table right here is loaded with fabric, A, because it's authentic to what he's doing, B, because it adds color simplicity to the image. All right, the sixth thing that I look for is motivated light sources. The film industry would use the phrase practical lighting, that is, any light source that is visible in the framing. This could be a candle, a lamp, or a street light. Any light source really. Now, oftentimes these practical light sources have some bad properties of light, whether it be their light direction. A street light being overhead might not look good for a portrait. They could have bad intensity. They could have bad light quality. They could have bad light color. Now, if you can include a practical light in your image, but then replace some of its negative qualities with lighting that isn't visible in an image, then you have a motivated light source. Now here's a clear example. We've got this desk lamp, and I already checked the desk lamp itself isn't even clipping, so I've stopped down enough so that this lamp doesn't influence the lighting in the scene very much, but it's really not creating the portrait lighting here. That is from a light that is out of frame. Now, I remember when selecting these photos that I specifically sought after photos that had a catch light in the glasses of the desk lamp, but did not feature my lighting that was out of frame. Okay, the seventh thing that I look for is immersion. This is normally done through a combination of focal length and perspective, where you take the photo from, and if you do it in such a way that the viewer is kind of forced to feel that they are in that position. This also correlates really strongly with layering. Whenever you're layering, especially in the foreground, I think that you're helping to create immersion in an image. Whenever I feel really pulled into a photo, it is almost always because of a strong foreground element that just kind of leads me into the experience and environment. As I get deeper in this list, I should mention there's no particular order to these. I go with the strongest themes that are appropriate to the story. Okay, the eighth thing that I look for is abstract properties. The words to a story are often going to tell it in a literal sense. The visuals for a story do not necessarily always have to take that route. Now, all the photos that I've shown you so far have expressed a very literal or real, objective expression of the story. But if I see an opportunity for it, I'll definitely take an abstract representation of that story as well. I did a whole behind the scenes video that you can check out on this shoot, but here we have, again, a very objective, real explanation of the story that this was designed to accompany, which is about this professor who does work with drones. He's holding a drone. It's very clear and obvious. But this image is a more abstract representation of that same idea, one that would have clarity if you are reading the story, but is not obvious if you're just looking at the image. Also, I know there's some purists out there, but in this digital world, there's no reason to feel limited by a single frame to create abstract results, or real results for that matter. Here's an example where we were photographing a student who translated his grandfather's Italian memoirs. So I have a photo of the student, I have a photo of the memoirs, and here's how we use it in the printed materials, which is definitely more illustration than anything, but it's still added purpose to the final piece. Now, I think how often you'll get this opportunity depends mostly on the client that you're working for and the type of work that you've previously shown. In my position, I don't think there's a ton of abstract opportunities because we're doing everything so quickly and we're satisfying so many different media departments for the school, but you could definitely have a more abstract or conceptual focus to editorial work. Number 9 is motion. Motion's an interesting discussion in photography because I think most often when we're going for something to be clear visually, we are often avoiding motion or motion blur, but it's something that you should always be considering to add a different layer to your photos. Here's a rather simple example of that. We've got some shutter drag going on, so the principal on the left of the frame, the subject of the photo, is staying as still as she possibly can while I capture a long exposure to get the people moving in the background. Now it has a story function. 1, it looks busier and more bustling when there is this motion blur, but 2, this also protects the students with anonymity, so we don't have to worry about who's in the background of the photos. Now, this was for an article on sign language, and again, it's a use of heavy motion blur while also freezing the subject with flash, but there can be motion without motion blur. Actually, we've got a little bit of motion blur in his hand here too, and on his hair. But here we've got a representation of motion without necessarily having motion blur. Fun fact here, this is actually my camera bag with a tiny little med kit put on the outside. And this image is an example of us getting what we needed very clearly before this, and then just using the additional time that we had with the subject to go after something completely different. I think motion in general goes back to action. It's kind of a byproduct of action, of doing something. But I think whenever there's strong motion in a photo or strong action in a photo, you feel more moved by it as a viewer. The final thing that I look for is spontaneity. This was back in January of 2020, and the whole purpose of the story was to focus on students working from home, working around maybe busy schedules at home. With 2020, I bet that this ended up getting used a lot more than they initially planned. But anyways, the purpose was that there are at-home options for learning so that you can either learn and get your degree from the comfort of your home or more easily accommodate a busy home life. And while we were capturing these clean photos of a student working from home on the comfort of their own couch, they got photobombed by their baby. And it's kind of funny because you see her trying to stay focused on the objective of this photo, which is having her look down at her laptop, working, thumbing through the pages of her book. But you see her starting to crack a little bit, and eventually she just cracks. She, of course, wants to acknowledge her baby that has come around the corner, looking for her attention. And I think these photos, which were purely spontaneous, end up telling the story in an even better way. And I think the primary reason why this photo stands out so much more than this photo is the emotion that is in the image. Now, the reason I didn't discuss a ton about emotion is because there's not a really wide range of it in the client that I shoot for, strictly because it's really not one of their goals. Most of our focus at the university promotes themes like leadership or focus or academic excellence, which is why the emotion in most of our galleries is meant to just look proud, strong, in control of the situation. So just understand that depending on either your goals or your client's goals, you may be exploring emotion in a much stronger sense than I am in the gallery that I've shown you today. I think there are plenty of instances of editorial photography where emotion appropriate to the story would be the most important factor overall. I'll dig through my archives and see if there's something that I can put together more detailed on that topic. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on some of the things that I look for in my editorial photography to help drive home the story. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. If you guys have seen any of these images and they stick out to you in terms of wanting to know lighting details or anything like that, feel free to comment in the description below. I'll answer any lighting questions that I can, and if it's juicy enough, I'll make a dedicated video on it. Subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and until next time, keep on shooting.